"Excuse me, sir. We don't serve people like you here." Denzel froze mid-step, his tray trembling slightly. The words pierced the hum of casual conversation, slicing through the gentle clinks of cutlery and low chatter. His mouth opened, closed, searching for a response, but the restaurant's waiter simply leaned back, smug as if delivering a verdict rather than a sentence. Shock surged like a wave through Denzel's chest. What do you mean?" he asked, voice shaking. The question barely left his lips before a harsh laugh erupted from the nearby table. A few diners snickered under their breath, exchanging uneasy glances that amplified the sting. Denzel's eyes darted across the room, seeking any sign of reason, a thread of logic that might untangle this abrupt injustice. There was none. Just the waiter, firm in prejudice, and a space filled with witnesses, strangers who suddenly felt the weight of the moment. He clenched his fists, gripping the edges of the tray so tightly his knuckles whitened. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to react, to defend his dignity, yet the words of discrimination clung stubbornly to the air, silencing any immediate retaliation. "Sir, I have a reservation," Denzel stammered, his voice cracking under the combined pressure of disbelief and rising anger. But the waiter's dismissive smirk signaled that no argument, no proof of legitimacy, could pierce the barrier of bias now erected between them. Murmurs erupted around him, low whispers swelling into audible murmurs as diners exchanged sharp glances. Phones appeared almost instinctively, cameras lifted, screens flickering in anticipation of a viral moment. Some faces betrayed silent judgment, others discomfort. A man in the corner leaned slightly forward, whispering, This isn't right." His words barely carried over the growing tension, but Denzel caught them, a flicker of support in the storm of ridicule. Yet, the laughter from another table reminded him that allies were scarce. The room split between complicity and curiosity. The waiter remained unmoved, leaning casually against the counter, his arrogance a sharp contrast to Denzel's quiet fury. Each gaze, each flash of a phone felt like a magnifying glass on humiliation, amplifying the sting of public rejection. Denzel stepped back, swallowing hard, trying to process what had just happened. The room spun slightly, and for a moment he questioned his own perception. Could someone really be this cruel without provocation? Anger bubbled beneath the surface, mingling with disbelief. His mind raced through memories of past encounters, the subtle microaggressions that had once seemed tolerable, now screaming as part of a broader injustice. Every word from the waiter reverberated in his skull, igniting a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Am I overreacting?" he whispered under his breath, though his gut told him otherwise. The disparity between expectation and reality clawed at his composure. His pulse thundered, and his breath came in short, jagged bursts as he struggled to maintain outward calm while inwardly teetering on the edge. The surrounding noise, whispers, sporadic laughter, snapping cameras, felt like a barrage of accusations, as if the room itself judged him. Yet amid the chaos, a stubborn ember of resolve ignited. He would not crumble entirely, but the weight of the public humiliation threatened to crush every fragment of dignity he had carried into that space. All eyes on him, Denzel became acutely aware of the isolation carved out by prejudice. Every gaze felt like a spotlight highlighting vulnerability, magnifying the sense of being othered in a space that should have welcomed him. He locked eyes with a few patrons, one young woman's sympathetic stare, a man's uneasy shifting. Yet most averted their glance, unwilling to confront the raw injustice unfolding before them. The waiter's smirk lingered like a shadow over the room, a constant reminder of systemic bias manifesting in the mundane. Denzel's throat tightened. As he swallowed back a retort, the words of frustration lodged like a lump of fire. Anger and humiliation collided, churning into a visceral cocktail that seemed almost unbearable. In that moment, the weight of historical injustice pressed down, and the scene stretched endlessly, each second echoing the sting of exclusion. Tupper. Restaurant buzzed with chaotic energy. Whispers, punctuated by the occasional gasp. Phones raised like sentinels recording the inequity. Snapshots of indignation flickered across screens, ready for an audience beyond the walls. Denzel's ears rang with murmurs that seemed both distant and intimate, blending into the rhythmic clatter of silverware. Each stare, whether sympathetic or judgmental, etched a mark on his awareness, layering humiliation with intense self-consciousness. He felt simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, every movement scrutinized. Denzel exhaled shakily, his composure fracturing under the relentless gaze. "How can this still happen?" he muttered internally, grappling with the persistence of prejudice. The question lingered, unresolved, planting the seed of reflection and resolve that would carry him into confronting the systemic forces behind such cruelty. "Morning, Marcy. Coffee's ready." Denzel's voice was warm, almost playful, carrying across the small kitchen as he set a steaming mug on the table. He smiled, watching the sunlight catch the steam in delicate swirls, a quiet moment of normalcy. Work emails waited, errands lined up, yet this simple ritual grounded him, a reminder that life's dignity often hid in ordinary moments. Despite the day ahead, he lingered, savoring the aroma and the small comfort of routine. Behind his approachable demeanor, there was a layer of introspection, a subtle wisdom shaped by life's challenges. Friends often joked that his kindness was contagious, but beneath the laughter was a resilience forged by experiences few could see, a quietly extraordinary soul navigating an ordinary life. Even in these small, peaceful moments, memories flickered uninvited. Denzel recalled a college interview where a professor's hesitant gaze had implied doubt about his abilities, or the time a store clerk lingered suspiciously over the price of his items, a silent judgment masked as caution. Each incident, minor, on its own, formed an invisible tapestry of systemic prejudice that followed him, leaving faint scars on confidence and trust. Yet, rather than harden him, these experiences nurtured empathy. He often paused to consider the challenges others faced, noticing subtleties that many overlooked. These quiet reflections shaped a mental armor, one that balanced patience with courage, awareness with action, preparing him to face injustice without losing the humanity that defined him. Denzel stepped onto the polished marble floor, the click of his shoes echoing softly in the grand lobby. Crystal chandeliers reflected a kaleidoscope of light, and white-gloved staff moved with precise choreography, attending to patrons with practiced smiles. The air smelled faintly of expensive wine and freshly baked bread, a curated perfection, designed to impress. For a brief moment, he marveled at the elegance, the exclusivity, and the quiet hush that seemed to demand compliance with its standards. Yet beneath the beauty, he felt an invisible barrier. The sense that this space, meant to celebrate refinement, might not fully welcome him. Still, he drew a slow breath, preparing to navigate the tension. A waiter's glance lingered a fraction too long, dismissive yet measured. A sommelier offered a polite nod, but his eyes flicked with subtle skepticism. Murmurs brushed past like invisible currents, barely audible, but unmistakable in their implication. Patrons shifted uncomfortably, some sneaking glances, others quickly, averting their eyes. Denzel noticed the quiet smirks, the small gestures that spoke volumes. A menu slid across a table with hesitation, a chair subtly repositioned to signal caution. Microaggressions formed a quiet chorus, a prelude to the storm he sensed brewing. Each signal sharpened his awareness, reminding him that elegance and exclusion often walked hand in hand, that bias could lurk beneath civility, waiting to test. the strength of anyone who dared to claim their space. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself in rhythm and reflection. Denzel's mind replayed lessons learned from countless encounters, each one a building block of fortitude. Anger threatened to surface, but he focused on composure, on clarity of thought rather than reactive emotion. "I've earned this moment," he murmured quietly, a personal mantra that strengthened resolve. He acknowledged the tension, the invisible, scrutiny, without surrendering to fear. His posture straightened, voice steadied, and thought sharpened. He was ready, not just to endure, but to respond with dignity if challenged. Calm awareness became his armor, each breath a preparation for the confrontation he sensed approaching. We recognize him not as a symbol, but as someone real, resilient, thoughtful, and quietly courageous. His calm, measured determination invites us to root for him, to anticipate the unfolding struggle against prejudice with both empathy and tense anticipation. "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" The waiter's voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, but the tilt of his head and the brief narrowing of his eyes betrayed something unspoken. Denzel offered a polite smile, scanning the menu, trying to ignore the subtle tension that curled in the air. "I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare, please," he said evenly, maintaining a calm tone. The waiter's hand lingered on the table for a heartbeat too long before retreating, his smile a fraction too sharp, his posture just a bit rigid, signaling entitlement. As he moved to relay the order, Denzel sensed the unspoken judgment, the quiet assumption that he didn't belong. Beneath the courteous words lurked a hint of prejudice, a silent assertion of hierarchy. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, a warning that his presence would not go entirely unchallenged. Minutes stretched. Water refills were slow, menus returned with minor errors, and every request, extra napkins, a sauce substitution, a simple question about the wine, was met with thinly veiled impatience. "Are you sure you want that cut cooked like that?" the waiter asked, voice low but tinged with skepticism. Each syllable felt heavy, as though Denzel's choices required justification. Requests that seemed trivial for other patrons were examined under a microscope, scrutinized, and often delayed. Denzel's salad arrived before the main course, though he had ordered them together. His glass remained empty for several minutes, the waiter glancing at him as if wondering whether he truly deserved attention. Other staff members exchanged faint glances, brief nods, micro-cues that confirmed he was being watched, assessed, and subtly marginalized. The slow pace, the condescending tones, the careful over-policing of his table, it was all intentional. Denzel recognized the patterns, the familiar markers of systemic bias playing out in everyday life. And yet he persisted in calm observation, recording each slight silently, preparing mentally for the confrontation he sensed was approaching. Anger bubbled beneath the surface. Denzel clenched his jaw, breathing deliberately to avoid reacting. He weighed the options: speak up and risk escalating the situation, or remain composed and endure the subtle assaults. "This isn't right," he thought, awareness sharpening like a blade. "But I can't let them strip away my dignity in anger." The decision wasn't easy. Every glance, every delay, every whispered exchange nudged frustration closer to eruption. He reminded himself that endurance could be power, that responding with controlled clarity often carried more weight than confrontation. Each slight was recorded internally, cataloged with precision, fueling a quiet resolve. Denzel's mind balanced the tension between self-respect and pragmatism, his restraint both a shield and a weapon, preparing him to face what would inevitably escalate without sacrificing the composure that defined him. A smirk flickered across the waiter's face as he passed another table. His colleague's eyes met briefly, a subtle exchange loaded with recognition, amusement, and shared complicity. Each gesture, each glance amplified the silent scrutiny, the sense that Denzel was being silently dissected, his presence a test to the restaurant's unspoken rules. "Is everything to your liking, sir?" the waiter asked again, the tone syrupy, the eyes sharp, scanning for any reaction. Denzel's measured nod barely satisfied him. The smirk returned as he turned to leave, walking past with the studied air of someone who believes themselves untouchable. Every flicker of expression, every nuanced motion, intensified the tension. Denzel's awareness sharpened, each detail, a puzzle piece building toward the inevitable confrontation. The audience feels the anticipation, senses the coming storm, and shares in the protagonist's careful navigation through a maze of subtle hostility and socially coded prejudice. Time dragged, each minute weighted with scrutiny. Denzel felt the accumulation of microaggressions pressing down, a quiet but unrelenting oppression that chipped away at patience. Every delayed order, every scrutinized gesture, every barely concealed smirk created a rising sense of vulnerability. His composure began to strain. A hollow tightness settled in his chest, a reminder of all the moments before when he had endured prejudice silently. The staff's vigilance, the whispered assumptions around him, the subtle exclusion. It was exhausting, isolating, and humiliating. Denzel clenched his fists under the table, seeking a grounding point, a tether to the calm. He fought to maintain. He felt the weight of systemic discrimination pressing invisibly yet unmistakably, each microaggression a reminder of the broader injustices woven into daily life. And though he breathed carefully, the sense of powerlessness grew, a prelude to the inevitable confrontation that would test his resolve and courage in the public eye. "We don't serve people like you here." The words hit Denzel like a physical blow, spoken loudly, deliberately, cutting through the murmur of the restaurant. Heads turned, utensils paused mid-air. The waiter's expression was a twisted mix of feigned civility and unmasked disdain, as though he had rehearsed this moment, savoring the spectacle. Denzel's hand froze over the menu. "Excuse me?" His voice stayed steady, though adrenaline surged beneath calm tones. "I said we don't serve people like you," the waiter repeated, stepping closer, his voice carrying enough for every patron within earshot to hear. "You must leave." A cold weight settled in Denzel's chest. Each syllable was more than a rejection. It was an assertion of hierarchy, a blatant act of racial discrimination meant to shame him publicly. Around him, conversations paused, forks clinked against plates as eyes darted from the waiter to him. He recognized the pattern, the same systemic prejudice he had faced in quieter, subtler forms, now amplified into a glaring, undeniable injustice. Denzel exhaled slowly, trying to steady the surge of humiliation. The room felt heavier, judgment, pressing down like a physical presence. He was no longer merely a customer. He was a symbol, a target for public shaming. The waiter's posture exaggerated, shoulders cocked, smirk widening. "Didn't hear me? You can't sit here," he said, tilting his head as if Denzel were a child failing a simple lesson. Laughter rippled across nearby tables, some subtle, some cruelly loud, echoing against polished walls. Denzel's stomach twisted. He clenched his fists, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "I've done nothing wrong," he said, voice quiet but firm, each word carrying weight. "Oh, you've done plenty," the waiter snapped back, voice dripping with mockery, waving, dismissively as if shooing away a pest. Patrons murmured judgments, their whispered voices adding layers to the humiliation. "Look at him trying to act normal," one muttered. Another chuckled, shaking their head. Every gesture, every laugh, every condescending remark intensified the scene. Denzel's heart pounded, each beat reminding him that public spaces were not always safe, that bias could erupt without warning. The waiter's performance had become a spectacle, turning a meal into a display of blatant racism. Denzel endured, feeling each microaggression as a sharpened edge, but refusing to let the venom strip his dignity entirely. Some diners pulled out phones, capturing the incident in shaky videos, their fingers trembling with a mix of fascination and fear. Others looked away, pretending the unfolding injustice wasn't happening, their avoidance a quiet complicity. A young woman near the bar finally broke the silence. "That is unacceptable," she called, voice ringing across the space, drawing. Gasps from surrounding tables. Her courage sparked a ripple of recognition. Someone else dared to name the injustice aloud. Denzel's gaze shifted between reactions, the spectrum of human response laid bare. Some watched silently, frozen, unsure if intervening was safe. Others whispered quietly among themselves, exchanging sympathy or judgment. The contrast between bystanders who amplified the injustice and those who resisted it highlighted how social spaces could either reinforce prejudice or nurture accountability. The moment crystallized into a moral crossroads, exposing the weight of public humiliation, the audience's role in witnessing bias, and the courage required to challenge systemic discrimination openly. Denzel's chest tightened, a storm of disbelief and fury swirling beneath controlled breathing. How could such blatant prejudice erupt in a place he had expected civility? Shock clawed at his mind, while heartbreak seeped deeper, mingling with memories of past indignities. "They think this is normal," he whispered internally. "That I'll just take it and vanish quietly." His thoughts spun, each one a reminder of the countless times society had tried to render him invisible, demeaned simply for the color of his skin. The waiter's smirk lingered, eyes flicking toward colleagues as if to draw silent applause for a cruel performance. Laughter and murmurs cascaded around him like a relentless wave, each sound chipping away at his composure. Denzel's vision blurred slightly, not from tears, but from the intensity of accumulated injustice, the sense of isolation amplified in the public eye. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe, each inhale and exhale an anchor in the tempest. Anger surged, raw, unfiltered, but he tempered it with awareness, refusing to allow the perpetrator control over his response entirely. Rage intertwined with sorrow, and yet beneath it all lay a seed of resilience, a stubborn refusal to let humiliation define him. This public betrayal, layered with systemic oppression, carved into him, etching the experience into memory, a visceral reminder that prejudice could strike anywhere, even amidst polished surfaces and whispered civility. Denzel felt the weight of history and present colliding, a private torment made painfully public. Viewers sensed Denzel's anguish, the unfairness reverberating through the story like a live current. Each insult, each mocking gesture draws the audience into his perspective, making the emotional injustice palpable. They feel the sting of public shaming, the shock of blatant discrimination, and the tension as bystanders navigate their own moral choices. Empathy becomes immediate, visceral. Outrage simmers, igniting a collective desire for accountability. The injustice isn't abstract. It's real, unfolding before their eyes, compelling viewers to experience the humiliation, fear, and anger as though they were standing alongside him. How can this still happen? Denzel asked himself, a quiet, raw question that seemed to echo across the room. The disbelief weighed heavily, mingling with the sharp sting of injustice and the solitude of enduring discrimination publicly. For a fleeting moment, he felt unmoored, as if reality itself had betrayed him. Powerless, exposed, and profoundly wounded, he grappled with the absurdity of a world that allowed prejudice to manifest so boldly. Yet beneath the despair, a fragile determination lingered, a whisper that this moment, painful and degrading, would not break him entirely, only set the stage for a reckoning yet to come. A voice leaned across the table, low enough for only a few to hear. "That's Denzel Carter, the civil rights advocate," the diner whispered, eyes flicking toward the unfolding scene. He discreetly lifted his phone, subtly capturing the waiter's behavior as Denzel endured the cruel words and mocking gestures. Denzel's eyes met the diner's for a brief moment, a spark of recognition passing between them. In that instant, an invisible alliance formed, validation against the injustice, and acknowledgement that his experience mattered beyond the immediate humiliation. The recording started to gain momentum, framing the incident for a broader audience. Each click, each subtle angle, was poised to expose the raw prejudice, turning a private act of discrimination into a public reckoning. "People need to see this," the diner murmured to himself, voice barely audible yet charged with conviction. Denzel felt a flicker of hope ignite. For the first time in minutes, the room seemed less isolating. His struggle, previously silent and personal, now had a witness. Social awareness began to infiltrate the space, and the weight of public shaming started to shift. Recognition, accountability, and the promise of justice hovered, subtle yet potent, shaping the next moments before any direct confrontation even began. A firm voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" the manager demanded, striding toward the table with authority that silenced the murmurs. The waiter faltered, caught mid-smirk, suddenly unsure how to justify his actions. "This gentleman cannot be served here," the waiter stammered, his previous confidence unraveling. The manager's gaze was unwavering. "That's unacceptable. We do not tolerate discrimination in this establishment. Apologize immediately." Denzel exhaled, barely believing the turn of events. The shift was subtle yet undeniable. The authority that had initially seemed distant now sided with fairness. "Thank you," he said, voice measured but carrying the weight of relief and cautious optimism. The manager continued, speaking firmly, to the entire staff. "Everyone take note. Respect and equality are not optional. We will not allow behavior like this to define our environment." The diner who had recorded the incident nodded quietly, sensing that the moment was being captured not just on video, but in the moral conscience of the room. Denzel's posture straightened imperceptibly. Validation had arrived, an external force amplifying his resilience. The injustice, once overwhelming, began to tilt, revealing the possibility of accountability and change as the power dynamic subtly, but unmistakably, shifted in his favor. The waiter's face paled, his earlier arrogance dissolving into unease. I didn't mean," he faltered, hands trembling slightly as he searched for composure. Every glance from the manager, every whispered remark from diners recording or watching, pierced his facade. The confidence that had fueled his cruelty evaporated, replaced by fear. The realization settled harshly. He was now the one under scrutiny, his misconduct documented and undeniable. Denzel observed quietly, noting the subtle tremor in the waiter's voice, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Power had shifted. What once allowed the antagonist to dominate the space now exposed him, rendering his behavior accountable and visible. "I'm sorry, sir," he muttered, voice weak, devoid of conviction, hoping the apology might erase the impact, though he knew it could not. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the restaurant, shifting tone as diners registered the manager's intervention. Shock gave way to cautious satisfaction, anger softening into hope as they witnessed the balance begin to correct itself. A few whispered among themselves, commenting on the courage it took to challenge such blatant discrimination. Finally, "Someone stepped in," one murmured, eyes bright with renewed faith. Denzel felt the room's energy realign, the tension easing as justice, however partial, asserted itself. The audience within the story, like viewers at home, could sense the reversal. Empathy now mingled with relief, Frustration transformed into cautious optimism, and the possibility of accountability inspired subtle smiles and nods of acknowledgement. Each moment reinforced that public advocacy and intervention could tip the scales, even in spaces previously dominated by unchecked prejudice. Denzel's empowerment grew with every supportive glance, every acknowledgement, every small act of solidarity. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat magnified as diners watched the antagonists unraveling. Slow-motion awareness captured the waiter's faltering movements, the subtle shaking of his hands, the slight quiver in his lips as the manager's authority radiated unwavering certainty. Diners leaned in, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and growing relief. Cameras discreetly clicked, phones recording angles that emphasized the injustice's reversal. The low hum of murmurs merged with rising musical tension, echoing the narrative's stakes and heightening the emotional resonance. Denzel's eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of those who had quietly taken sides. Each nod, each subtle gesture of acknowledgement amplified his sense of empowerment, a stark contrast to the earlier isolation and public humiliation. The waiter's panic intensified, his attempts to regain composure failing as the audience's. Attention refused to waver. Authority, empathy, and moral accountability converged, forming a tableau of social reckoning. In this charged atmosphere, the story's stakes crystallized. Public bias confronted by observation, intervention, and collective consciousness created a moment of cinematic gravity, reinforcing the narrative's emotional depth, the protagonist's emerging empowerment, and the undeniable power of social accountability, setting the stage for the next act of resilience and confrontation. "You're going to have to explain this to the corporate," the manager said firmly, standing close enough for the waiter to feel the weight of accountability. The staff gathered quietly, tension thick in the air as murmurs spread. The waiter swallowed hard, trying to find words. I didn't realize." "You ignored basic respect," the manager interrupted sharply. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. Your behavior is unacceptable, and disciplinary action will follow." Phones clicked everywhere, capturing the confrontation as it played out in real time. Videos uploaded instantly to social media, rapidly circulating under hashtags like racial justice and stand against discrimination. Each share amplified the incident, turning a localized act of cruelty into a national conversation about systemic bias and workplace responsibility. Diners whispered to one another, some nodding in approval, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The waiter's previous arrogance crumbled under scrutiny, the reality of consequences settling like a stone in his chest. Denzel remained silent, observing the shift in power as authority, social accountability, and public attention combined. Justice, long delayed in this moment, began to assert itself. The room's energy transformed, hinting at a resolution that extended beyond a single apology, a signal that societal scrutiny could enforce fairness and moral responsibility. Denzel exhaled, a slow, steady release of tension as his shoulders relaxed. "Thank you," he murmured softly, not just to the manager but to the diners who had witnessed, validated, and supported him. For the first time in hours, he felt control over the narrative. His dignity, once stripped away in the cruel public spectacle, returned not through words, but through acknowledgement, solidarity, and the undeniable truth of justice asserting itself. "I can finally breathe," he thought, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The humiliation, though still lingering, lost its sting. The audience, whether in the restaurant or watching online, could feel the catharsis, the tension dissolving into a sense of moral satisfaction. Denzel's composure radiated quietly, yet powerfully. Each measured step forward was not just a return, to normalcy, but a reclaiming of self-respect in a world still marred by prejudice, reminding viewers that resilience could transform pain into quiet triumph. The restaurant quickly became a focal point for conversation. Social media buzzed with commentary, debating systemic discrimination, individual accountability, and the broader implications of unchecked bias in public spaces. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as both a cautionary tale and a call for social responsibility. How do we ensure such behavior is never tolerated? One online commentator asked, igniting threads that dissected not only the incident, but the culture that allowed it. Even patrons who had quietly observed found themselves discussing ethics, respect, and societal obligations in hushed yet fervent tones. The staff, too, faced introspection, realizing that the moment extended beyond a single individual. It reflected a collective need for awareness, training, and moral vigilance. Denzel's experience became more than personal vindication. It sparked dialogue, education, and awareness, elevating the story from private injustice to a broader social reckoning that demanded attention, reflection, and change. Sitting alone later, Denzel let his mind wander through the emotional storm he had weathered. The humiliation, the mockery, the whispered judgments, all still vivid, but now intertwined with a sense of triumph. I survived this, he thought, the words grounding him. The ordeal had exposed the raw truth of systemic bias, yet also illuminated the power of witnessing, advocacy, and courage. Each act of solidarity, from the diner who recognized him to the manager who intervened, had created a ripple, a reminder that collective action could challenge oppression. He reflected on the resilience required not just to endure, but to reclaim dignity. Pain, he realized, could be transformed into inspiration. His story, captured online, had already sparked discussion, awareness, and empathy. Each share, comment, and reflection extended his voice, proving that one person's experience could ignite change. Denzel allowed himself a quiet smile, the weight of injustice tempered by acknowledgement, moral support, and the realization that perseverance mattered. For viewers and society alike, his journey offered not only confrontation with harsh realities, but also hope, courage, and a roadmap for standing strong against prejudice, turning suffering into a catalyst for awareness and empowerment. Have you ever faced subtle bias or microaggressions? Denzel's voice resonates through the screen. Share your story in the comments. Your experiences matter. Your voice can spark awareness, and together, we can challenge discrimination and foster understanding in ways that truly count. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share. Amplify the conversation about racial empowerment, equality, and standing strong against prejudice. It takes all of us to make change happen. Remember, resilience isn't just surviving injustice. It's rising, speaking out, and inspiring action. Every voice matters, and together, we transform silence into power and oppression into accountability.